So hello, welcome, namaste. Those of you joining me in the room, those of you joining me on Zoom, and those of you listening to the recording afterwards. Welcome to a little Dharma talk and meditation that I like to call Living from the Heart. All about this 18-inch spiritual journey, which can sometimes take many, many lifetimes, simply traveling from the head to the heart space. I like to start these talks with a poem of my own as a lead-in to this week's teachings. And finally, we'll finish with a short meditation to integrate what we've talked about, and then have some time at the end for question and answer. Today's poem is called, "What Are We?" A form as flawed as flowers, a celestial sea of mangroves, the world lapping at our feet. Saturated beauty in a desert of tears. These bodies, borrowed dewdrops reflecting 1,000 green suns. These minds, mycelium, sending out spores letter by letter. Our hearts, a web. Tug on yours and I am pulled. I mean, when I see you, I see me. What are we? I wanted to begin today by talking about this idea of darshan or darshana, particularly what it might mean to shift our darshan. So even in this little gathering we have here, there's often different ways to define what it means to sit in circle or sit in an audience and have a certain spiritual talk or spiritual discussion. In some communities, for example, a person sitting up front and espousing certain spiritual teachings is known as a satsang. Perhaps you also have heard this term. And I always love this name for the gathering because I find anytime you hear the word sat, your ears should kind of perk up a little bit because this word sat is a very crucial word found in many mantras and many sacred texts. And it's a fairly challenging word to directly translate. The most common translation that you will hear is truth. Sat simply means truth. So when you do hear the mantra Sat Chit Ananda, or read a book by Swami Sat Chit Ananda, that is referencing the truth of our consciousness being that of bliss. One of the yamas and niyamas in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is satya, or truthiness, this basic idea that as part of our precepts, we should not lie to one another. And also in yoga, we talk about the three gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. And sattva is the quality that we are trying to cultivate. And tamas generally means darkness or heaviness or inertia or matter. And rajas tends to be activity and energy and movement. But sattva is light and spaciousness. So we even eat sattvic foods. Tamas foods are like really heavy, like meat and alcohol. But sattvic foods are those fresh foods that don't make us feel heavy afterwards and instead make us feel light, like fresh fruit and vegetables. So even the satsang is when we talk about the truth in community. So that's where the sang comes from. It's short for sangha, which not only means community, but your sangha isn't just your golf club or your bridge club. It's a community of like-minded spiritual practitioners. So it's people that support you on this path. So a satsang is a gathering of your sangha speaking of truth. And another way to think of a gathering of people speaking about truth is what's known as a darshan. And you might have also heard this term. Before I go into what darshan means, I'll just mention I tend to avoid both of these terms, mainly because I'm not a guru. I'm just a teacher. I'm just a practitioner. Wisdom has been shared with me, and I am here to share it with whoever may listen. I simply think of myself as a conduit for the teachings that I am here to pass along. Words like darshan, words like satsang, they tend to be a little bit more formalized. You can't just decide to lead your own darshan, for example. Dharma talk tends to be a little bit more of a free term to use. And even this word dharma can also be really deeply unpacked. I think I'll probably spend a whole talk talking about dharma. For now, I'll have you think about three main translations of this word dharma. One is teaching. So we're here to learn the dharma. Another is purpose. So you might have heard someone tell you, you have to follow your dharma or discover your specific dharma. And another one is the natural way and order of things. So there is a natural order and harmony to the universe, and our task is to align ourselves with this dharma within which we can become wise. But today we're talking about our darshan. And most Western scholars translate this word darshan or darshana to mean philosophical school. And when you get into the text, you learn about the ancient darshans of Indian classical philosophy. So in general, there's 6 Shad darshans. These are considered to be the orthodox schools that consider the Vedas to be an authority. And then we have the non-Orthodox schools. And some of these you might have heard of, like the school of Buddha and the school of Vedanta. These are also considered darshanas. And some of the classical darshans you perhaps might not have heard of, like the Mimamsa school, the Charvak schools. The Jain school is another one, which is a little bit more popular than some of the other ones. But an interesting thing about the etymology of this word darshan is it is very closely related to this word drish, which means to see. So if you've ever been in a yoga class and your yoga teacher says, all right, let's have your drishti focused on a point in front of you that's not moving. So drishti can mean like gaze or viewpoint. And one of the things that we do in yoga is we do learn to focus the mind on our goal, on what it is that we intend to bring into this life. So another way to translate this word darshan, other than philosophical school, is way of seeing or worldview, which is to say that we all have a certain worldview. We all have certain lenses that we perceive this reality through. We all have a particular darshan, not just in the way you are sitting. You, of course, have your own unique perspective, but through your culture and through society and through your upbringing, we've all been conditioned to perceive the world in a certain way. And much of our spiritual path is on shifting our darshan, and much of our growth is around seeing the world in a different way. So, as Marcel Proust, I think it's Proust, could be Proust, says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And this is something that we seek to cultivate. This is why we sit still and watch the breath, sit still and practice our meditation, because we are not seeking new landscapes, but to see our current landscape with new eyes. So you might think of your darshan as your worldview, as how you are perceiving this reality. So you might also think of it as like your consciousness, the sort of plane of consciousness that you're on, or the level of being that you're on. And part of our spiritual practice is to change this, is to shift this. So a very popular way we do tend to say, find a different level of consciousness is with chanting. So when you do get into the sacred texts, particularly of yoga, like the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and the Vedas, you'll find very often these entire scriptures are chanted. And these ancient texts tend to be divided into 2 categories. One is smriti, which means remembered. And the Smriti texts, they tend to be lovely stories. And when you're telling a good story, you change it, you embellish it a little bit, you remember it, and it changes. And that is in stark contrast to the Shruti traditions, which Shruti means heard. And the basic idea is that thousands of years ago, some say 4, 5, 7,000 years ago, the great rishis, the great sages, were sitting in the Himalayas in caves and they were meditating. And they altered their consciousness in such a way that they didn't come up with the Vedas, they simply heard them. They simply heard the Vedas and started chanting them themselves. So the basic idea being that because the great rishis, because the great sages heard the Vedas in an altered state of consciousness, if we too chant those same Vedas in the highly specific way that the great rishis did, we'll also transform our own consciousness in the same way that they did. So all sorts of spiritual stories talk about what it really means to shift one's worldview. A common one that I like to point out is there's a story of two younger monks who are arguing. They're both looking at a flag waving in the wind. One says it's the flag that's moving. The other one says, no, it's not the flag that's moving, it's the wind that's moving. They go back and forth, and then finally the senior monk walks by and says, you're both wrong, it is your mind that is moving. So many stories, they involve kind of two perspectives, and then there's that third, almost higher order or different perspective. And this is also why so many stories, particularly of the Zen tradition, they're funny. And a huge reason for that is because we're trying to wake up out of our current level of consciousness. And the thing about jokes is, if I have to take the time to explain the joke, it's no longer funny. If I use logic to explain the joke, you don't really get it. Getting a joke is a level of realization that goes beyond the logical thinking mind, of which we are trying to break out of. So this is part of our path, is shifting our darshan, shifting our worldview. So a common example that I use is if you look outside and you look out the window and you see a tree, what is it that you see? And what I mean by that is you might see this world through a bit of a scientific darshan, maybe perhaps like a materialistic darshan that sees in general, an organism or a species undergoing photosynthesis in order to propagate itself. This is one perspective, and this is one darshan. But what would it look like to take a more shamanistic or animistic or deep ecological perspective that sees this as a beautiful manifestation of spirit and a beautiful manifestation of tree spirit? Now, you could also take a more Buddhist darshan that recognizes that in form there is emptiness, and in emptiness there is form. So although we identify with forms, that tree is fundamentally empty of any inherent treeness. And within the form, there is emptiness. And within the emptiness, there is form. So there are, of course, different ways to perceive this reality that you're in. And this is our darshan. And this is what much of our spiritual practice is meant to change and meant to transform. So there's a poem I love. It's called Monet, referring to the painter. Monet refuses the operation. And this is by Lisa Miller. And it goes, Doctor, you say that there are no halos around the streetlights in Paris, and what I see is an aberration caused by old age and affliction. I tell you, it has taken me all my life to arrive at the vision of gas lamps as angels, to soften and blur and finally banish the edges you regret I don't see, to learn that the line I call the horizon does not exist, and sky and water, so long apart, are the same state of being. 54 years before I could see the great cathedral is built on parallel shafts of sun, And now you want to restore my youthful errors, fixed notions of top and bottom, the illusion of three-dimensional space, wisteria separate from the bridge that it covers. What can I say to convince you the Houses of Parliament dissolve night after night to become the fluid dream of the Thames? I will not return to a universe of objects that don't know each other, as if islands were not the lost children of one great continent. The world is flux, and light becomes what it touches, becomes water, lilies on water, above and below water, becomes lilac and mauve and yellow and white and cerulean lamps. Small fists passing sunlight so quickly to one another that it would take long streaming hair inside my brush to catch it. To paint the speed of light, our weighted shapes, these verticals, burn to mix with air and change our bones, skin, and clothes to gases. Doctor, if only you could see how heaven pulls earth into its arms and how infinitely the heart expands to claim this world, blue vapor without end. It has taken me all my life to arrive at the vision of gas lamps as angels. So it can sometimes take all our life, much concerted effort to see the world in a different way. So the question that I'll offer you as we think about what our darshan is, as we think about what it might look like to shift our darshan, is to ask yourself, what does it mean to see with the heart? What does it mean to see from the heart? Or you might even ask yourself, what does the heart see? There's that famous quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Sorry for butchering that name, the author of The Little Prince. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I'll say that again. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. So when we think about seeing our darshan, even this simple quote tells us, maybe what my eyes perceive or what my mind perceives isn't what is most essential in my life. So sometimes in compassion cultivation trainings, we do this little exercise. We visualize ourselves in front of a vast expanse, like a field or a cliff overlooking the ocean. We ask the simple question, in my heart of hearts, what am I looking for in my life? And when we do this exercise, it's amazing the answers that come up when we quiet the mind and ask the heart what it's truly seeking in life. We get answers like love, peace, kindness, compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, ease, connection, all values, all intentions that we can set before we begin any practice. What's interesting to me is that nobody says, after quieting the mind and tuning into the heart and asking the heart what it wants, no one says the newest phone or a big house or a Ferrari or any of those sort of materialistic things, because of course we know that what is essential, like love, compassion, kindness, forgiveness, is invisible to the eye. So another common kind of spiritual story that you hear is one that has many different variations, but it generally involves a cop, a policeman at night walking down the street. And off in the distance, right underneath the street lamp, he sees a man crawling on all fours. So he goes over to him and asks him what he's doing. And he says, I'm looking for my keys. I can't find my keys. I've been looking all over and I still can't find them. So the cop, being the nice guy that he is, he gets on his hands and knees and begins to help him. So they're both underneath the street lamp. It's nighttime. They're on their hands and knees. Finally, the cop says, let's try a different method. Like, where did you last see your keys? And then he says, well, at the bar, but it's closed now. And then the cop's like, well, then why are you looking here? And the man says, because this is where the light is. So another humorous story. And one of the lessons that we can take from this, of which there are many, that's what I love most about stories, is we tend to look for happiness, satisfaction, and pleasure where it's easy, where the light is, rather than what is invisible to the eye. And don't blame yourself, because this is natural. We live in a society that thrives on dissatisfaction. We live in a society where every day we are pummeled with all sorts of images and information about what happiness is going to be. It's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be this. So it's fairly easy to just click on that ad when you're scrolling through whatever app it is on your phone to think like, oh, maybe this is what will make me happy. So it's perfectly natural to have this understanding, to sort of be in this level or plane of consciousness or awareness. But of course, we are here to shift our awareness and to think about what does it mean to see with the eyes of the heart. So I sometimes think of the mind and the discriminative mind as being like channel one. And the mind, as we say, is a great tool, but a terrible master. The mind has taken us to extraordinary technological and scientific advancements. We don't want to discount these things. That being said, the mind is always and will be inherently dual in its thinking. It will inherently divide up this world into discrete concepts in order to understand it. So light implies dark, up implies down, south implies north, birth implies death. This is how the mind grasps this world. And I think of this as sort of like the first channel. And we're here to change the channel. We're here to change the darshan. And the discriminative mind, it's very good at picking out differences between people. You can look at a crowd of people and you can think, oh, tall person, short person, big person, small person, long hair, short hair, big nose, small nose, good teeth, bad teeth. It's very good at this. The mind is amazing at finding difference and separation in the world. So what might it look like to change the channel? To change the channel number 2, to change to the channel of the heart. And last week we talked about this basic idea that intimacy is into me see. It's seeing deeply into somebody beyond the surface level appearances that historically have created lots of separation and difference and violence in the world, to seeing deeply into somebody, what you might call the secret beauty or the inner beauty of somebody, or simply what it is that they're going through in their own emotional world. So a common story used to describe this level of awareness is, imagine yourself walking in the woods and you see a dog off into the distance, kind of close to a tree, and you like dogs. So you start to approach the dog. And as you get close, you see it jumping and snarling and growling at you. And you conclude, this must be a mean dog. So you start to avoid it. You start to kind of walk around the dog. And as you walk around the dog, as you change your darshan or change your perspective, it suddenly occurs to you as you see the dog that its leg is caught in a trap. So this dog is in a lot of pain. And suddenly your awareness shifts from this is a big, mean, and scary dog to this dog is afraid. This dog is in pain. And this is what the heart sees. Even when we're with our partner and perhaps they're yelling at us, or just the other day, someone so kindly rolled down their window and yelled at me as I was driving down the street because I did some driving maneuver that they didn't approve of. And when that happened, or when your partner is yelling at you, rather than see the mad and scary dog, we can see the scared dog. We can see somebody who is in pain, somebody who is suffering. And when we aren't able to confront or be with or hold our unhealed wounds, it of course turns into attacks, and defense and denial. So I do think that the heart sees the world through the eyes of compassion. The first noble truth is that life contains suffering. It ends up being quite optimistic because that's not the end of the story. We can free ourselves from suffering. So there's good news in that regard. But we have to recognize the suffering that is an essential part of existence. Because I find if you scratch the surface of anybody's life, you will find suffering. As the Buddha would say, we will all suffer from sickness, old age, and death. But beyond the big three, we suffer in big and small ways throughout our life. We experience loss, we experience pain, we experience all sorts of frustrations. So the heart recognizes people are suffering and it sees them with the eyes of compassion, which has that desire for this person to be alleviated of this suffering. And it also interprets, just like our mind can interpret behavior in a certain way, it also can interpret behavior in a certain way from a more compassionate lens. So rather than a mad dog, we have a scared dog. Rather than a dog that needs to be avoided, this is a dog that needs help. When you do see a very angry person, it's easy to have a sense of resistance or even to reflect back the same anger. But what would it look like to see this person as needing help, to see this person as wounded? There's a comic and it shows two women. They're inside their house, they're looking outside their window, and they see a big giant insect. It's kind of one of those Far Side comics. And one woman is saying to the other, I know it's a giant, hideous insect, but maybe it's a giant, hideous insect that needs help. Even giant, hideous insects need help. So I do think of this as channel 2. And just as long as we're talking about darshans, we can maybe think about what channel 3 might be look like. If channel 1 is the mind, channel 2 is the heart, what is channel 3? And if the heart sees the suffering, the pain that people are experiencing, I think the third channel is seeing the light. So as Rumi put it, the lamps are different, but the light is the same. One matter, one energy, one light mind, endlessly emanating all things. One turning and burning diamond. One. Ground yourself. Strip yourself down to blind, loving silence. Stay there until you see you are gazing at the light with its own ageless eyes. One love, one light, one God, one. The lamps are different, but the light is the same. So it's the mind that sees separate lamps in these separate bodies. But it's the heart that goes deeper into me see until finally we see into the fundamental for somebody, which of course is just like us. The same light, just in different lamps. So I think it's important to recognize that the heart is open. It's the mind that is narrow. So one of the fundamental lessons we can take from this idea of darshan is that we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. As the saying goes, when a pickpocket sees a saint, they only see the saint's pockets. So what we see in the world is a reflection of ourselves and our own mental states. So if you're looking for problems, you'll find them. If you're looking for reasons to be happy, you'll find them too. So although the Buddhists say that life does contain suffering, they also say that all the conditions for happiness are already right here. There's no problem that needs to be fixed. There's nowhere we need to go. All the conditions for happiness are right here. You have eyes in good condition that can see the rainbows in the sky. You have ears in good condition that can hear the birds as they sing. You have a body in good condition that can walk on this earth. Some say that walking on water is a miracle. When we truly become present in this moment, we realize it's a miracle just to walk on this earth. So that's the challenge, is being able to shift our darshan to see this way, particularly because once we recognize our current darshan and how we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. We also have to recognize that we similarly behave in a way that confirms the way that we experience the world. So, for example, there's another story of a traveler who comes to the edge of a town. And at the edge of this town, there's an old woman sitting on a park bench. And the traveler asks, "Tell me, what are the people in this town like? I'm debating whether or not I should visit." And the woman on the park bench says, "Well, what were the people like in the town that you just came from?" And the person said, "Oh, they were a miserable lot. You know, their intelligence was questionable, and the women were ugly, and I didn't find them to be hospitable whatsoever." So the woman says, "Well, then you'll probably find that here." And the traveler says, "Oh, thank you very much," and goes along his merry way. And as the story goes, another traveler comes, and traveler's like, "So, how are the people here in this town?" And the woman asks, "Well, how were the people in the town that you just came from?" And he said, "Oh, they were a lovely bunch, amazing, kind, very hospitable. They welcomed me with open arms, a little rough around the edges, but you know, it's normal to be aversive to a stranger. But once you warm up to them, they warmed up to you." And of course, the woman said, "Ah, yes, well, you'll find that here." So not only do we see the world as we are, but then of course we act in accordance with what we see. So if we think the world is, say, a dangerous place full of dangerous people, we're going to act and respond to people in a certain way that might make our belief essentially a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we see with the heart and we see the good in people, then we'll also bring out that same good. So Marianne Williamson wrote, "The world changes when we change. The world softens when we soften. And the world loves us when we choose to love the world." So I meet a lot of activists who are very passionate about changing the world. And fantastic. There's lots of things this world needs changing. That being said, the most effective way to change the world is to change yourself, is to change your own darshan. So when I think about even how big the heart can get, I do think that we can make this whole world our home. There's a famous story of a very enlightened being who lived on top of a mountain, and some of the younger monks wanted to make the pilgrimage up there. So it took many days and sleeping in cold weather. And finally, the disciples, they come up to this being's hut and they walk into the hut, and there this guy is fully naked in the lotus position. So these celibate monks, they avert their eyes and they say, "Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Why do you not have any clothes? Where are your pants?" And this enlightened being looks up and turns to the monks and says, "What are you talking about? This entire world is my hut, and this hut is my pants. So what are you doing in my pants?" So what would it look like to see this whole world as our home? And, you know, living in Oakland, I spend a lot of time on my street corner cleaning up trash, a lot of which people have casually thrown out the window. And I often picture them at home, and I'm like, when they're in bed, are they just like tossing their Chick-fil-A wrappers onto the floor? It's possible that they are, but my guess is that they're not. And there's this basic idea that we have that we can throw things away. And we kind of mean away from me, away from my limited sense of self and home and world. But when we, of course, see this whole world as our home, or even this whole world as our body, we can see polluting this world is polluting ourselves. Polluting the rivers is like polluting our own blood. So I find that the mind is quite logical, but it's the heart that is often paradoxical. And even Jung is famous for saying that if it's not paradoxical, it's not true. This is another way of shifting our darshan, is seeing potentially two contradictory truths as true. So Shunryu Suzuki was famous for saying, "Good news, everyone, you're perfect just the way you are." And so students would be like, "All right, I'm perfect just the way I am." And then he would follow it up by saying, "And there's room for improvement." And I think this is the paradox of the heart. It says you're perfect just the way you are. You are validated and accepted and loved just for who you are. And it sees the best in you. It sees the tree in the seed. It sees your potential. And it also offers room for improvement. So, time and time again, we see just how big the heart can be. So, Swami Prabhavananda wrote, "The little space within the heart is as great as the vast universe. The heavens and the earth are there, and the sun and the moon and the stars. Fire and lightning and winds are there, and all that now is, and all that is not." I'll do another quote. Haruki Murakami wrote, "Your heart is like a great river after a long spell of rain, spilling over its banks. All signposts that once stood on the ground are gone, inundated and carried away by that rush of water. And still, the rain beats down on the surface of the river. Every time you see a flood like that on the news, you tell yourself, that's it. That's my heart." So as long as we're learning some terms today, we learned sat, and then that's usually followed by chit, ananda. So we can also think about what chit means, which is usually activity of the mind. So in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, when he says yoga is the calming of the mind, he says yoga chitta ritti nirodha. Yoga is the mental turbulence of the mind finally ceasing and becoming calm. And when we talk about the Buddha is not a name, it is a title. Buddha just means awakened one. And we all have Buddha nature. We all have the capacity to awaken within all of us. So you might have heard of the quality known as bodhicitta. This is another quality that we are seeking to cultivate in our practice. And bodhicitta is what you might call vast universal altruism. It is an awakened, boundless heart that encompasses the whole world. It's open to the ups and downs, the 8 worldly winds, you could say, the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. So Pema Chodron says that just as alchemy changes any metal to gold, bodhicitta transforms any experience into a vehicle for awakening our compassion. So when we think about the heart, when we think about this awakened, boundless heart, it's as inclusive as it gets. It takes it all in. So Father Richard Ward, the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, he talks a lot about this basic idea that the mind works in either or dualities, but the heart works with both and includes it all. And I think we see how for many times throughout history, one's religion, one's belief system was an either or, was in us versus them. You're either with us or you are against us. You either believe in what we believe or you are a heretic. But the heart is both and. It's the mind that creates dual us and them, but it's the heart that is just us. I think about this sometimes when I go to travel in other countries. And it's an interesting sight to see in some countries where you see men holding hands walking down the street. And it's clear that these aren't like queer or gay men. These are just two brothers, two deep, close friends holding hands walking down the street. And at first I see that and I'm like, that's fantastic. Can you imagine if men in the United States felt comfortable walking down the street, holding hands with their good friend as a display of brotherhood, as a display of affection, as a display of love and connection without any, qualms about it? And if other people even saw that and they didn't assume there was any sexual or romantic relationship happening, just two friends being there for each other. So on the one hand, this is a great sight to see, and I do wish it was more socially acceptable in the United States or Western culture. Now, that being said, on the surface level, this seems nice when you go to other countries, but then you realize a huge reason that men are holding hands walking down the street is it tends to happen more commonly in countries where women are second-class citizens, where it's not okay for a man to walk with his wife holding hands down the street. So we all need connection and belonging and physical affection. So we're going to get it somehow. So in these societies, you can't hold your wife's hand, so you're just going to hold your good friend. So we see this either or. It's like, I want to bring some people into my heart, but I'm going to make it exclusive. So if I put somebody in, somebody else has to go out. If I'm getting closer to my fellow men, it's going to happen by ostracizing the other sex. So the heart can take it all in. And that's what it's designed to do. The heart longs to be open. It's meant to be open. Just as the bud longs to become a flower, the heart longs to be open. And I think we often even feel the pain of when our heart closes or when our natural reaction to things is to have our heart closed, which is, of course, something that very naturally happens when we experience loss. So whether it's loss that is intentional, such as a breakup or the end of a relationship, or it's loss that is unintentional, such as somebody passing away, I think loss and losing somebody is a very common way that people do close their hearts. So when we think about Rumi's quote that our task is not to seek for love, but to remove all the obstacles against it, we have to look at what's preventing that love from overflowing. What is the dam that's preventing that just gush of love and kindness, that bodhicitta, that vast universal altruism? And it tends to be a resistance to what you might say is just change, a resistance to acknowledging that everything in this life is impermanent, that nothing is going to last, neither you, nor the person you care deeply about, nor your pet, nor your experience of these things. So this is another lesson of our darshan. This is another thing that we can recognize when we do shift our darshan. Rather than seeing this world as a amalgam of discrete, separate, permanent objects, we shift our darshan to see it as constant shifting and changing all the time. Even when we look at the tree, we're like, that tree is not static in any way. It is growing rapidly, at least in a greater time scale than those of us who are human. So one of the most profound insights that we can gain, one of the most profound darshans that we can have is just this fundamental recognition that nothing lasts. So our task is to let go. As the saying goes, if you hold on, you'll get rope burn. We have to recognize that we're all passing through. You might think of this as impermanence. You might think of this as anicca. There's an old story about a famous rabbi living in Europe who was visited by a man who had traveled by ship from New York to see him. The man came to the great rabbi's dwelling, a large house on a street in a European city, and was directed to the rabbi's room, which was in the attic. He entered to find the master living room in a room with a bed, a chair, and a few books. This man had expected so much more from this famous rabbi. So after greetings, he asked, Rabbi, where are your things? The rabbi asked in return, well, where are yours? The visitor replied, but Rabbi, I'm only passing through. I'm just a traveler. And the master answered, so am I. So am I. So the next time you're having an argument with somebody, it could be your partner, I recommend to picture both of you 100 years from now. And suddenly you recognize that that petty little argument that you're having right now is really not nearly as important as the connection between the two of you. So in couples counseling, we say, do you want to be right or do you want to be connected? Do you want to be correct or do you want to be connected? And I'll have you imagine another situation. Imagine you're sitting at home and you're thinking of all the things you have to do that day. You got to make a doctor's appointment. You got to go to the grocery store. You got to water the plants. You got to make the food. You got to do this, and this. And then suddenly you get a phone call. And in the phone call, you learn that somebody you deeply care about is in the hospital. And then suddenly, I was going to say putting down the phone, but you'd probably just press the button, pressing the button to turn off the phone. You're in a new world. You're in a new world that sees only what is essential, because that is what is invisible to the eye. Suddenly, those little things that you had to do that were just consuming your world, they don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter what's going to happen in that television show that you were watching. What matters is that somebody you care about has limited time on this earth. So this is what it means. This is what it means to see through the heart, to recognize that all the time, that the only time we have is now. Now is the time to love. Now is the time to express our love for each other. So a common question of inquiry goes, if you were going to die tomorrow, who would you call and what would you say? And the follow-up question, why haven't you done that yet? So sometimes when I'm in teaching a large group, I ask, who here has a device in their pocket that can instantly send a message to anyone that you have ever met in your life, no matter where they are in the world? Everyone's like, oh yeah, I guess I do have that device and capability. And then I ask, if you got a message that said, hey, I think you're great. I was just thinking of you. I just wanted to send a message saying, I think you're great and I love you. And of course, everyone says, I would love to receive such a message. Well, you have that opportunity right now. Every day, we have millions of opportunities to express love for the people that we care about. So this is what is most essential, in my opinion. I should also mention all spiritual teachings, everything I say here, don't take it as the truth. Verify in your own real and lived experience if it is true. So the common phrase from the Buddha is ehipassiko, which simply means see for yourself. See if it's true. See what truly matters. Take an honest inquiry into the heart space and see what it might look like to see through the heart. Chogyam Trungpa uses the metaphor of like metal, metal. Like essentially all spiritual teachings are like being handed raw metal, like iron or gold. And it's up to you to hammer and warm and shape the metal, and only then can you wear it as a necklace that then fits you. So all of this is simply an offering, simply an inquiry. So I'll finish with another poem by Matt Licata. It's called From a Healing Space. The specific forms that love take in our lives arise and pass in time, for this is the way of form. Time is the great dissolver, but love itself is that which never comes and goes. We never know what form love will choose to take in the future, for there is no love in the future. Love is only now. But it can take a cleansing of perception to see through the veil, behind the scenes, where love is always at work, giving birth to one of its forms, one of its children, while recycling and dissolving another. If we become too fused with a specific form, we believe we need love to take a particular person or way of finding purpose and meaning. Our heart will inevitably break when love obliterates that form for something new, which it always will. This shattering is the great gift of form, evidence not of error and mistake, but of wholeness and profound compassion. This dissolution and reorganization is a special kind of grace that the conventional mind struggles to know. But the heart knows, the body knows. Mm. Come to a straight spine. Relax the shoulders, rest the hands, and take that 18-inch journey down into your ribs, into the heart space. And check in. As we breathe into the heart, you might even imagine a light or a warmth or a love emanating from the heart space. A bodhicitta, an awakened heart. As we cultivate bodhicitta, we cultivate a love and compassion for all beings everywhere. And we can start at the most important being, ourselves, offering yourself kindness and blessings. You might resonate with the standard metta mantras. May I be happy. May I be free. May I touch great and natural peace. May my heart and mind awaken. May I accept myself just as I am. May I be free from all suffering. And yes, the heart could take in the whole world, but we have to start with ourselves. So taking a few moments, encompassing your entire being, warts and all, perfections and imperfections, perfections and room for improvement, taking it all in with a loving heart. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. May the benefits of our practice be for the benefit of all beings. And Buddham saranam gacchami, Dharmam saranam gacchami, Sangam saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, the awakened nature inside all of us, the diamond heart, the light that is the same inside all of our different lamps. I take refuge in the Dharma, in these teachings that have been passed along for generation after generation. And I take refuge in the Sangha, this community. None of us can do this alone. Thank you for sharing your practice and presence with me today. Namaste.